while. They set everything up for us before we even got here. So we really want to thank them. And most important, we want to thank Kingdom Care for showing up and helping us plan this out as well. Again, we can't do this work alone. On our day-to-day, it's me, my supervisor, and Jakia. We're small but mighty, and we have our support. I want to thank the Hirsch team because they always show up. The health equity team internal at DOH, they always show up for us. So thank you so much for always showing up. And last but not least, I want to thank Her Fathers Global. They show up and they show out. We have some surprise guests. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Big, Kobe, and of course, Dr. Monique. We want to just say thank y'all for coming and contributing to our event this evening. We are grateful for your partnership. We could not do the work that we do without the partnership. So I just want to say thank you. I want to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight. Her name is Dr. Monique Williams. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Curvines Global. Dr. Williams, CEO of Curvines Global, is an accomplished public health researcher and practitioner. She works in local government, leading development and execution of a city strategic plan for addressing violence. She spent many years in academia with research focused on improving health outcomes within marginalized population, using community health development, equity, and violence prevention strategies. She led a CDC designated Center for Youth Violence Prevention Research, where she oversaw the engagement of academic and community expertise in the integration of practice, research, and teaching to advance health equity, racial justice, and build capacity for violence prevention within communities. So without further ado, I want to say thank you, Dr. Monique Williams, again, and I want to welcome her to come up, our keynote speaker, to talk about different roles in one goal, because that is ultimately our goal in doing this work. So when I saw the theme of you all's summit for today, it reminded me of a talk that I just did like a month and a half ago. And the theme of that community was one mission, many hands. And so it's interesting and exciting to see that kind of around the country, folks are really diving into the significance of comprehensive strategies for violence prevention, as well as the necessity of multi-system engagement. And so that's a lot of things that I talked about there, and we're going to talk about here. And through an analogy that I think most of us can understand, which is pushing body, right? And so, because I can't think of a better example of kind of different roles working together towards, well, different roles working together towards one goal, than right what our kind of most important within our body do to keep us alive every day, right? And so your lungs don't do what your heart does. Your heart doesn't do what your immune system does. Your immune system doesn't do what your nervous system does. And then your nervous system doesn't do what your skeletal system does, right? Different roles, but they all have the goal of a healthy body. And so you can just imagine, right? Oh, I'm sorry. You can go to the next slide. I'm not controlling here. If your body decided, or systems decided they weren't going to communicate together anymore, right? If your immune system just decided that it didn't need your nervous system anymore. Or if your lungs were like, that heart thing is kind of overrated. Right? Like, what would actually happen to your body? Be a whole lot of dysfunction and dysregulation happen. And I would argue that the same thing happens in communities who address violence, because violence is often treated like it's a one system problem, right? Law enforcement needs to address it. If violence is happening in school systems needs to address it. Or, I don't know, mental health professionals, they need to address it. But we know that violence isn't a single system problem, right? And so it's not going to get addressed by utilizing a single system as a solution. But you have different systems with different roles, and we still have one goal. And so today I want to explore kind of what happens when we begin to understand violence the same way that we understand every other public health crisis. Because I believe that, right, like violence is one of the most significant public health crises of our time. But I also believe that it is one of only epidemics that we have like chosen to treat differently. And so you can change to the next slide. So I'll start with the question. How do we determine that something is a public health crisis? That's the shocking thing out. But think about it for a moment. What makes something public health? It isn't because something is criminal. It isn't because it's something political. What you say? It affects population. It brings harm to population, right? It's not because the news said so, right? Public health crises are characterized by a few things, right? One of which my brother just shared here, right? The harm that it causes to population. They create widespread concerns and consequences. They spread through exposure. There's identifiable patterns, but most importantly, a lot of times they can be prevented. And so that's why we study infectious disease. That's why we monitor overdose, right? That's why we track suicide rates. That's why we investigate environmental hazards. That's why we, invest in prevention. Public health asks different questions, right? So we don't just focus on who caused harm. So we also ask what happened. What conditions made this harm? Like, what risk factors were present? What protective factors were missing? What is actually spreading? And then what could or would interrupt this transmission? And so health isn't defined by whether or not something is criminal, but it's defined by whether it harms population, whether it spreads through exposure, it requires coordinated prevention. And I think that distinction matters. And it matters in a way that causes us to shift how we're questioning what's happening, which then shifts how we determine what our solutions are. And so when we encounter a contagious disease, we never begin by like blaming the infected person. Like when do we ever see that happen? We start to identify like what happened to this person, where did this spread, where did this from, who else is vulnerable, and what conditions contributed to this transmission, and then how do we stop the further spread? You can change that. And so now, think about all of that as relates to violence. When violence is repeatedly witnessed, when trauma becomes chronic, when hopelessness becomes normalized, and when instability becomes environmental, and when safety is inaccessible, harm can't stay contained. And so it's spread through behavior, through exposure, through relationships, through families, through neighborhoods, through generations.
And if all we do is respond after something happens, right, we're not creating safety, right? We're just managing the aftermath. And so we like to say this, but our resources and strategies really haven't shifted completely into supporting it. But you hear, you can't arrest your way out of this, right? Like we can't arrest our way out of trauma. We can't punish our way out of despair. And we can't police our way out of kind of social abandonment, which is happening to a lot of our communities. And so you can't build healthy communities if every intervention begins after the damage is already done. So that's why violence has to be understood through a public health lens, not because accountability disappears and not because individual choice isn't a thing, because it is, but because when we understand through a public health lens, then prevention becomes possible. And that's what we want. And so to truly understand violence through a public health lens, then we have to ask ourselves another question. And that's how do public health systems respond when an epidemic emerges? And that's kind of where we come in with the work that we do at Cure Violence Global, right? Step into the utilization of those epidemic reversal strategies, right? We identify and detect. You work to change the behavior and the thinking of those at highest risk. We deal with changing the norms of groups and communities. And so let's think about COVID because y'all lived through it in this room. And so when COVID emerged, I think something happened that we hadn't seen was that, right? Like a pandemic in our lifetime. Well, we saw like the entirety of multiple systems, multiple ecosystems, like activate at once, right? Research, public health departments, hospitals, schools, state leaders, government systems, mental health professionals, community organizations, neighborhood, everybody, right? Your employer. Um, Everybody had a different role, but it was the same goal. Like, how do we stop things spreading in our communities? And so, not one person expected a hospital to solve the issue of COVID by themselves, right? Nobody expected epidemiologists to figure it out by themselves. So there was a lot of pressure on health departments. I'm sure health departments had some. Yes. Nobody expected law enforcement, right, to figure it out alone, because public health crises require ecosystem response. And here's what's fascinating: one of the most important jobs during the pandemic was held by people that many Americans had never even heard of, which was the contact tracing. Like, what is that? You know? And so maybe some of you, whether you did or you know somebody who received a call from them, like, hi, calling for somebody that you've recently been, close to or connected to tested positive for COVID, right? Should be everything on the inside of you. But at that point, right, that contact tracer, right, they've already identified the individual, and so their job wasn't just, okay, identify this person tested. Now they have to kind of think about everybody that this person was potentially connected to, right? They generate, lives in their home, who they sit next to at work, um, who have they been spending time with, who else their risks. And so kind of notice what the contact tracer is doing here, where they're not just focused on the individual, but they're focused on the network. And because we come to understand something incredibly important, that risk travels through relationships. And once you understand that, right, you begin to understand violence differently too. Because when someone is shot, when someone is carrying untreated trauma, when someone becomes involved in a conflict that could escalate, the risk doesn't stop at the individual. Who are they connected to? Who else is grieving? Who else is angry? Who wants retaliation for that shooting? Who else is vulnerable to being pulled into whatever is happening in this moment, right? Who else is at risk? The network matters, the relationships matter, and the exposure matters. And that realization brings us to one of the most important parts of the I would say, the most important parts of the ecosystem, which is the credible messenger. Go back, maybe extended. So let's name the idea of transmission for a moment. Um, because you can hear the phrase violence behaves like a contagion. And for some people that makes them uncomfortable. Not because the science is wrong, but I think there's just a limited understanding or misinterpretation of what that means. So violence isn't a virus, right? Violence is a behavior. It's a event. And sometimes it's a choice. But what kind of public health has taught us about behavior is that it doesn't happen in isolation. And so behavior is influenced by multiple things. Behavior is influenced by environment, by exposure, by relationships, by socially, by stress, by trauma, by opportunity, right? Like by what you may repeatedly see, which is also just exposure. Um, but these things are true when we talk about right other public health issues that we've addressed, like smoking and drug use and seatbelt wear and diet, exercise. So just add violence to the list. Public health has long understood that what surrounds people shapes what becomes possible. And that means that exposure really and truly does matter. Uh, and while exposure isn't destiny, right? Not everybody that's exposed doesn't automatically mean, right, that it's going to happen. They have been exposed to COVID. They didn't get it. But exposure absolutely shapes probability. And so think about a young person growing up in a neighborhood where conflict is regularly resolved by violence, where retaliation is normalized, where trauma is just common, right? It's just expected, and grief is constant. Um, that young person wasn't born violent. They're just adapting to the environment that they've been exposed to. And a lot of times that explains behavior. And so if we're serious about prevention, you have to be willing to understand the environment. And because of how violence spreads, we can never just focus on the individual. We have to focus on the environment too. So this is also where public health comes in with many other questions, right? And so we start asking what is wrong with this person, and we start asking what happened to this person. What have they been exposed to? What are they carrying? And what support is missing? And so I want to show you this video. Um, okay. It kind of explains this in real time.
Okay. In school, I go to the candy store and just even the bus go for a ride, right? I mean, around here, you see people, you're exposed to this. You just have to expect it, right? The more you saw, the more it just seemed like that was the normal way for people to behave. Even me sometimes. Before I knew it, it was touching every part of my life, but spreading like a disease. And one night, I heard Pastor put in the hospital. I knew what I was supposed to do, but he stopped. He said it was an interrupter. He knew me from the beginning. He told me how violence can spread like a disease if that, and how we all end up hurting if we do. And told me that I could help stop the violence by not being violent myself. He showed me how I could use my influence to change how people around me view violence. I started to step up to it. and changed who I looked up to and who looked up to me. It's all about healing the damage of the violences. It's about changing my behavior. Now, instead of going to that violence around me, I was helping others to leave violence behind. Then they changed people around them across the city, across the country, across the whole world. Because the truth is, violence is a disease. That this is the cure. Let's make the cure contagious.
So I like to show that video, right, just as a real-time example. And so, right, what you just watched shows some really important things about violence prevention. Right, when violence occurs, it doesn't just stay contained one individual, and not even just one individual in the victim, right? There is a ripple effect that happens, right? Shooting happens, people are grieving, people are angry, and right, people are expecting retaliation, people are planning retaliation, and right, like there are networks, families, that are just ready to respond. And so unless something or someone interrupts that cycle, then the cycle is just going to repeat itself. And so public health, we call that transmission. And so that's where our credible messengers enter the story. So earlier we talked about contact tracers, and the work that they did during COVID and identifying, who's exposed, who's at risk, who needed what information, who needs support, who needs intervention, right? The contact tracer understood something that most don't, right? That the networks matter. And so now think about that in the same way that you think about violence and corruption. The shooting occurs, who was the victim closest to, right? Who's angry, who's responsible, who feels guilty, and who wants to do something about the shooting. And so, similar set of questions or similar job. And so, credible messengers often function like violence prevention contact tracers. And not because they're tracking disease necessarily, but because they are interrupting the transmission of violence. And so they understand the networks, they understand the relationships, they understand the social dynamics, and they understand the risks. And I mean, perhaps most importantly, right, they have access. And they have access that no one else has. And so, because right, like when you're dealing with particular populations, you need certain information. And if you don't have certain level of trust and credibility with certain individuals, there's certain information you will never get, which disqualifies you from being able to disrupt anything from happening. And so, because of what their credibility does in community, because they have trust, and that trust determines who opens the door, right? Who's willing to listen, willing to be vulnerable, right? Their role is a necessity in the process of ensuring that the next act of violence doesn't happen. And that's part of why, right, their role matters so much. Nice. There are a lot of places that have, I think overall, like there's a harmful kind of narrative that exists as a field, that reduces credible messengers to essentially kind of like just what they survive, right? A lot of times people just say, oh, credible messengers are formerly incarcerated individuals. As though, right, like it's the only valuable thing about them as a person. And so I think while it's important to understand their history, what also makes them credible is like what they learned through the place of survival. and how they utilize what they learned in that place of survival to interrupt violence. And so I like to say, right, that expertise is important. My PhD will get me in rooms that other people can't get into, right? And I just like to say that they have PhDs in the streets. They have PhDs in conflict mediation. They have PhDs in being able to reduce risks, right? They have PhDs in getting into rooms and massaging situations, and shifting outcomes that keep, right, people alive on earth. That's significant expertise. And that's significant expertise that needs to be treated like expertise. Um, and not just kind of like an aftermath of growing as a field. Um, but this is still like a significant issue when we talk about all of what it takes to address violence in our community. And so I'm not suggesting that, right, like lived experience replaces education or that education replaces lived experience. I'm just saying communities as a whole. Right, research matter, us public health folks matter, clinicians matter, law enforcement matters, the criminal justice matter too. And they matter a great deal to talk about um, intervention. And if you truly believe that, then the other thing that we have to stop doing is treating credible messengers as um, like disposable labor. See that a lot? Because we routinely ask people who have survived extraordinary trauma to return to the environment, even with trauma, to help others navigate trauma. And then act surprised when maybe they burn out or crash out or relapse, continue with, um, the medical aspect of this. Um, and so helping communities heal requires helping to heal the healers as well. And so making that an intentional part of the work, because the ecosystem can't remain healthy if the people carrying the greatest burden of the work are the least supported in the work. And I think once we understand that, we begin to see something even bigger, right? And so violence prevention isn't simply interrupting crisis, it's also about like changing the conditions that continuously create them. Um, which reminds me of a story. You can go to the next slide. Is anybody familiar with the parable of the babies in the river? We're going to talk about this. So if you imagine a quiet hill and people are going about their day, this normal. And suddenly they hear crying, screaming, and they look over and see a baby, right? It's in the river. So someone jumps in the river, right? Grabs the baby, hands the baby to someone, somebody dries out the baby, they get the baby medical, right? Um, and as they're doing this, there's another baby down the river, and another baby, and another baby, and another baby. So some of this community is like set up a whole system of rescuing babies downstream in this river. You got some people in the river, right? You got some people on the side of the river, but the system is now been set up to save these babies as they're coming down this river. And then one day, right, somebody asked, where's the babies coming from? Right, somebody who's upstream. It says, where are the babies coming from? We need to go figure out where the babies are coming from. And then you have people that are entrenched in the work, they're in the river, right? They're doing the work, and they're like, no, don't spend resources on people up there. Like, babies are dying now, right? We need more people in the river. We need more people, we need more resources. We need the attention to be here so that we can save more lives. But then this other person says, but if you never go upstream, we're always going to save babies in the river. Right? So then there's this tension that exists between upstream and downstream. and which is more important. And so when we talk about, this analogy as it relates to violence, right? The people in the those are mental health support. Those are right, all of the business right now necessary services and supports to pull people out of the water and street. But then you go upstream, right? Then you have your policymakers and decision makers and funders and right researchers and people who are trying to or should be looking at right the root causes of what's creating the conditions for babies to end up in the river in the first place. And neither side is wrong in an argument of where resources need to go. It's just the necessity of a both and strategy, right? And how do we work together to assist there? And so that's just another area that I see a lot of times where there's tension about where to put the money and where to put the resources. Should we be putting it in intervention or should we be putting it more upstream prevention? And the answer is both. And so as a body, we look at a different framework, right? And so okay, well, I'm in the church, okay, so something that's existed for thousands of years. But like in this book that I read about, um, I saw this scripture and I think it um, went perfectly with some of what we're talking about when we talk about like what's actually needed and whose role matters, whose role doesn't matter when it comes to public safety. And I'm going to read what it says. It says the body is not made up of one part, but of many. And then it goes on to say something that like sounds almost absurd, right? If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body. It would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And then a question is asked. And it's a question I think every system represented in this room should wrestle with, right? If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? And if the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? And if you think about that, right, like, who can imagine their whole body just being an eye, really strange and just absolutely absurd? Think of it like that, right? You don't have spark, you don't have lungs, you don't have any system, you're just an eye. Right? It's a ridiculous thought. And yet we do it all the time. Right? Keep searching for like one solution, one program, one aid, one department, one intervention. Solve a problem that requires many systems working together. Right? Different roles with one goal. And so that brings me to a question I'd like to consider, which is what part of the body? We can take that other side. Like not metaphorically, not abstractly, but seriously, what part of the body, right? How many of you primarily work in prevention? How many of you, we keep your hand up, how many primarily work in intervention? How many of you primarily would say that you primarily work in healing? Yep, if you got two hands, you gotta use your feet too, go ahead. Primarily work in systems, policy, funding, or infrastructure. But when you look around the room, right, different roles, where you go. So because if we want to build healthy communities, right, we have to have healthy systems, and healthy communication one system. So we can think about it together. Starting the nervous system. The nervous system detects danger, it recognizes threats, it communicates information, it coordinates response, it ensures the body reacts before danger becomes catastrophic, right? Who does that sound like? What's your body? Your average work, your frontline work, your hospital responder, your emergency responder. The people closest to the emerging risk, right? People who often know something is wrong before anyone else knows. People who receive a phone call at midnight if something is happening and they need to respond to it. The people responding before they know that there's a response that's needed, right? Different role, but one goal. Or maybe you're the immune system. What does our immune system do? Supposed to prevent us from getting sick in the first place, right? So the immune system identifies threats before they become crisis. They strengthen resilience. They reduce vulnerability. And what does that sound like? Sounds like youth development programs. Sounds like prevention programs. Sounds like mentors, right? People working every day to build protective factors before harm occurs in a community between individuals, right? These are the people who are helping communities become stronger in the face in the threats that they face. Or maybe you're the skeleton system. And most people don't think about them often. But if you ever remove your skeletal system, what would you actually be? Right? Everything will fall apart. And so these are our structured people, infrastructure, policy, funding systems, organizational leadership, systems design codes, right? The framework that allows everything else to function within it. And then maybe you're the heart, right? The heart's the main light. It keeps resources moving. It ensures every part of the body is what it needs. Baby community leaders, neighborhood organizations, right? People who create connection, create trust. People who create the environments where people feel like they belong. That's the part. Or maybe you're the lungs. The lungs provide oxygen. They make life sustainable, right? Without oxygen, your body can't function. Economic opportunity, workforce development, your housing, your access to resources, right? The things that make long-term well-being possible. Those are your lungs. Or maybe you're the brain, the research, the evaluator, strategists, data analysts, and academic folks, right? The people who help us understand the patterns, trends, and the evidence. And they are, right? So they're helping us make informed decisions. So you have different roles, but everybody still has the same goals. And here's what I need us to understand. The nervous system is not more important than the system. The heart is not more important than the lungs. Like everyone has their role, and absent of the functioning of their role, the entire body suffers. And so just as we think about that, and you think about your role, I don't want anybody to think of their role as insignificant, but I also don't want anybody to think about their role as superior. You think about your role as adjacent, the others, right? Different function, but still a necessity. And so when you think about the work that you all do here, or what your ecosystem looks like here, right? How does everyone communicate? You know, what do the communication tracks look like? What does the coordination look like? Do you trust one another, right? Do you value one another? Value what that system brings to public safety? And do you understand the role that it should be playing? Because healthy communities aren't built by isolated experts, right? There's a congruence, there's a coming together. And so that brings us back to where we started. You can go to the last slide. Helping us understand violence as a public health crisis. Again, not because accountability doesn't matter, but just because prevention matters too. Because exposure matters and relationships matter and all the things matter. And so, right, like we want everybody to understand that your role is significant, your role is important. And even when you don't feel appreciated or necessary, are, what's going on? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, say that.
Now we can clap a little bit louder. Want to thank you again, Dr. Monique, for coming, taking your time out and informing us of how important this work is and connecting it to the public health aspect. A lot of times, a lot of people, when they hear gun violence, they don't understand why is the health department doing this work, right? So I think it's so important to be able to connect the dots and have someone to come in to break it down and explain how it is a public health emergency. Gun violence is an epidemic. We heard the information, and we will continue to spread the word, continue to talk about it. So we want to thank her again for coming out and spending her evening with us to be able to give us that information and provide us with that knowledge. So before we move forward, CBG, Caroline's Global, they do this thing where they say, hey, are you on a 1 or on a 10? Right? You want to check the temperature in the room. It is late, came out here after work. So 10 being the highest, you want a high, you feel good, you happy, you great, you excited that you made it out, you heard the information. And that's you. Raise your hand if you're on a 10. All right, 6 or 10. I'm excited. All right. If you're on a 5, I'm just gonna go to the middle. You're like, yeah, I'm excited, but I'm tired. I've been up all day. And I'm gonna be honest. I want to be on a 10, but I've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning. So I am not on a 10, but I'm gonna give it an 8 because I love doing this work. I love being able to gauge and interact and see amazing faces, seeing people that I haven't seen in a long time, and just being appreciative of you all coming out here. And so y'all on a 10 too because I'm from New York and the Knicks won last night. So I'm definitely on a, I'm feeling good because I think we're gonna have a win. Haven't been in the. And if you're a Spurs fan, it's okay. I don't need you to push back on me. I'm claiming it. We are in the church. I am claiming it. So the next section of the agenda is we're gonna do Explore Network. We are a little bit behind in time, but I still want to be able to give everyone that opportunity to be able to connect, speak with someone that you do not know, explore the tables. We do have a raffle coming up. So if you have not entered the raffle to get a biometric lockbox, please either go to the front or to the gun violence intervention table and sign up. Right after this, before we have the panel discussion, we are going to call out the name and see who will win the raffle. So if you haven't signed up, please do. Because we practice safe storage around here. That's important too. We ain't talking about it today, but don't get me started. So if you haven't signed up and you are a gun owner, it is important to be a responsible gun owner. So please sign up. If you have not eaten, there is still food left. So please, you can go this way to the right behind me, and there is food there. And right before we start the panel discussion, we do have a department, wait, friends, for 1 second, matter of fact, before, because they just want to say one more thing, to let you know as you go out and be able to visit the resource table.
Thank you so much, and I'm honored to get this time. I'm Nicola Smith-Key, everyone calls me Dr. Nikki. I am a senior project manager for the Hate Crimes Prevention Program for the county. We have a table out there. I'm encouraging everyone to please stop by the table. We're doing a hate crime survey, community survey. We really need to hear from folks. Last year, and I'll be very honest, last year, the survey we had, I think 80% were white older women. I have friends who are white older women, and they said, we have time. I want to hear from all of you, please. Thank you.
You know what that means? Please go visit the table. Alrighty, you can go up, visit the tables. Please pick up. There's a lot of goodies out there. Please take the goodies, get something to eat, sign up for the raffle, and then we'll come back and we'll jump right into the panel discussion. And if you have a data slide, and if you want to ask more questions because you are a data person, please stop by GIT table. We have our epidemiologist here, Chelsea, who is up here on the front, and she will be able to answer any questions about our data when it comes to gun violence here in the county and in the city. Thank you.
I was gonna take some pictures.
Outside of maybe we got that meeting. I was trying to put two and two together, yo, like what like to talk for bullets. Like I feel like I feel it on the way of kind of, but it really difficult. Man, man, graduate. Yeah.
And I just did not go back to sleep.
Hey, he's from one of these things.
I had a presentation last night.
Yeah, I got my food.
Yeah. We had an event on it. Yeah, this is one day. And then I'm on something. Listen, and I'm gonna one of the panels for the day.
So you go say,
Like everybody. We'll make it. It's game 3.
what she say about it? She said she wasn't.
I said, like, I know I got to stay up. I was going to have this one. I ain't always ever take time. I was like this. Come on, Jay. Come on. I was like, I said, you gonna get, I said, you know what, you might need to go in the back and I give him like the back. One time with Josh Hart. And I said, you know what, I thought about this. Because that's people, this time, like, really don't like, and I said, that's when we just sit in basketball. Like, the defense, that's how you do it. Oh, yes, and guys, and this is a good day, because there's been Yeah. He grants it with us. Top tier. See what I'm saying? Top tier. This is what I'm saying. So I gotta stay woke. So we gotta win tomorrow too.
No.
See, I knew it was. I knew it was somebody out there that was not. It's a way you football. Right here.
Hey, listen. That.
Like, be very sad. Very sad. She said she wasn't. All right, beautiful, you ready? All right. So your leg is over there. We are, but that would be. Well, no, actually, my. I don't know what to say. Big bro. Yes. Right. Well, no, no. Long time ago. I did not see him. Yes. Yes. About it.
Didn't. What you say, yo? Want cookie? Chocolate chip. She like her food reheated. You know what I mean? Respect her. They say what you say.